apples. When you find a world upon which human beings are growing, then this world is humane, because it humans. Only we seek to deny our mother and to renounce our origins, as if somehow we were lonely specimens in this world, who don't really belong here, and who are aliens in an environment consisting mostly of rock and fire and mechanical electronic phenomena, which has no interest in us whatsoever, except maybe a little bit in us as a whole, as a species. You've heard all these phrases. Nature cares nothing for the individual, but only for the species. Nature red in tooth and claw. Nature is dog eat dog, or as the Hindus call it, Matsya Nyaya, the law of the sharks. And so also a very popular idea in the 19th century, running over into the common sense of the 20th, that we belong as human beings on some very small, unimportant speck of dust on the outer fringes of a very small galaxy in the middle of millions and millions of much more important galaxies. And all this thinking is pure mythology. Let me go in a little bit to the history of it, because it's important for us as Westerners to know something about the history of the evolution of our own ideas that brought this state of mind about. We grew up as a culture in a very different idea, where the universe seen as something in which the earth was the center, and everything was arranged around us in the way that we, of course, as living organisms, naturally see the world. We see it from a center, and everything around us. And so this geocentricture of the world was, however, one in which every human being was fantastically important, and you were watched day in, day out, minute in, minute out, by your loving and judging Father in heaven. And you, because you have an eternal life, are infinitely important in the eyes of this God. But Western people got this feeling that this became too embarrassing. You know how it was as a child when you were working in school and the teacher walked around behind your back and looked over while you were working, and you always felt put off. And so in exactly the same way, it's embarrassing to feel that your inmost thoughts and your every decision is constantly being watched by a critic, however beneficent and however loving that critic may be. That you are always under judgment. To put this to a person is to bug him totally. So it was a great relief for the Western world when we could decide that there was no one watching us. Better a universe that is completely stupid than one that is too intelligent. And so it was necessary for our peace of mind and for our relief that during the 19th century particularly, we got rid of God, and found then that the universe surrounding us was supremely unintelligent, and was indeed a universe in which we as intelligent beings were nothing more than an accident. But then, having discovered this to be so, we had to take every conceivable step and muster all possible energy to make this accident continue and to make it dominate the show. So the price which we paid for getting rid of God was rather terrible. It was the price of feeling ourselves to be natural flukes in the middle of a cosmos quite other than ourselves, cold, alien, and utterly stupid, going along rather mechanically on rather rigid laws, but heartless. Now, so this attitude provoked in Western man a fury to beat nature into submission. And so we talk about war against nature. When we climb a mountain like Everest, we have conquered Everest. When we get our enormous phallic rockets and boom them out into space, we are conquering space. And all the symbols we use for our conquest of nature are hostile. Rockets, bulldozers. This whole attitude, you see, of dominating it and mastering it. Whereas a Chinese person might say, when you climb a high mountain, you conquer it. Well, why this unfriendly feeling? Aren't you glad the mountain could lift you up so high in the air so as to enjoy the view? So this technology that we have developed in the hands of people who feel hostile to nature is very dangerous. But the same technology in the hands of people who felt that they belong in this universe could be enormously creative. But the important thing about this whole philosophy of nature and of man's place in nature is that this Taoist and later Zen Buddhist and Shinto feeling about man's place in the world is today corroborated by the most advanced thinking in the biological and physical sciences. Now, I can't stress that too much. Science is primarily description, accurate description of what's happening, with the idea that if you describe what is happening accurately, your way of describing things will become a way of measuring things, and that this in turn will enable you to predict what is going to happen. And this will build you some measure of control over the world. Now, the people who are most expert in describing and who are most expert in predicting are the first people to recognize the limitations of what they're doing. First of all, consider what one has to do in science. In a very simple experiment in which you want to study a fluid in a test tube and describe what is in that fluid so accurately that you must isolate that fluid from what are called unmeasurable variables. I have a fluid in a test tube and I want to describe it accurately. But every time the temperature changes, my fluid changes. So I want to keep it free from changes of temperature. This already implies an air conditioning system. Also, I don't want my fluid to be jiggled, because that may alter it. So I've got to protect it from trucks that go by the lab. And so I have to build a special bump-proof room where trucks won't jiggle it. Also, I have to be very careful that when I look at this fluid, I won't breathe on it and affect it in that way, and that the temperature of my body as I approach it won't alter it. And I suddenly discover that this fluid in a test tube is the most difficult thing to isolate in all the world, because everything I do about it affects it. I cannot take that fluid in a test tube and take it out of the rest of the universe. And so it is separate and all by itself. A scientist is the first to notice this. Furthermore, he knows not only that it is his bodily approach that alters things, he finally discovers in studying quantum theory that looking at things changes them. So when we study the behavior of electrons and all those subatomic particles, we find out that the means we use to observe them changes them. So that what we really want to know is, what are they doing when we're not looking at them? Does the light in the refrigerator really go out when you close the door? So what all that is telling us is, you cannot stand aside as an independent observer of this world, because you, the observer, are what you're observing. Now, how will you say what an ant is doing without describing, at the same time, the field or the environment in which the ant is doing it? You can't say that an ant is walking if all you can describe is that this ant is just wiggling its legs. You have to describe the ground over which the ant is walking to describe walking. You have to set up directions, points of the compass. And so you soon discover that although you thought you were talking about an ant, what you're actually talking about is an ant environment, a total situation from which the ant is inseparable. So too, human behavior involves, first of all, the description of the social context in which human beings do things. You can't describe the behavior of an individual except in the context of a society. You have to describe his language. Indeed, in making a description, I have to use language which I didn't invent. But language is a social product. Then beyond human society, there is the whole environment of the birds, the bees, and the flowers, the oceans, the air, and the stars. And our behavior is always in relation to that enormous environment. This gives us at first, as Westerners, a sense of frustration, because we say it sounds fatalistic. It sounds as if we were saying, you thought you were an independent organism. You're nothing of the kind. Your environment pushes you around. But that idea, simply, if we would express that idea as a result of hearing what I've just said, it would mean that we didn't understand it. You read B.F. Skinner, the supreme behaviorist psychologist, and he describes all phenomena of nature in terms of man being pushed around. But let's suppose that we live in a world where things don't get pushed around and can't be pushed around. Supposing there's no puppet. Supposing there is no cause and no effect. That instead of things being pushed around, they are just happening the way they do happen. Then you get an utterly different view. And this is the view with which we are dealing, lying behind this culture. As I said this morning, there is no boss. You, as a human being, are not going to push this world around. But equally, you're not going to be pushed around by it. It goes with you. The external world goes with you in just the same way as a back goes with a front. How would you know what you meant by yourself unless you knew what you meant by other? How would the sun be light if you didn't have eyes? How would vibrations in the air be noisy if you didn't have ears? How would rocks be hard if you didn't have soft skin? How would they be heavy if you didn't have muscles? So that the way you are constituted, the way your organism is formed, calls into being the phenomena of light and sound and weight and color and smell. There is a koan in Zen Buddhism. What is the sound of one hand? There's a Chinese proverb which says, one hand does not make a clap. So if two hands clap, make the clap. What is the sound of one hand? You see? What a silly question. And yet everybody is trying to play a game in which one side will win. And there can be one hand clapping to get rid of the opposite. Light get rid of darkness. Most of you, I am sure here, on the whole, identify yourself with the nice people. In other words, you live fairly respectable lives, and you look down upon various other people who are not nice. And there are various kinds of not nice people. In Sausalito, where I live, they're called beatniks. They're people who wear beards and who live along the waterfront and who don't follow the ordinary marriage customs and who probably smoke marijuana instead of drinking alcohol, because alcohol is the drug for nice people. Now, what the nice people don't realize is that they need the nasty people. Think of all the conversation at dinner table that you would miss if you didn't have the nasty people to talk about. How would you know who you were unless you could compare yourselves with those who are on the out? How do those in the church who are saved know who they are unless they have the damn? Why, St. Thomas Aquinas let it out of the bag and said that in heaven the saints would look over the battlements of heaven and enjoy the just sufferings of the souls in hell. Jolly, won't it be, to watch your sister squirming down there while you're in bliss? But that was letting the cat out of the bag, because the in-group can't exist without the out-group. Now, in my community in Sausalito, where the out-group are sort of beatniks, they, in their term, know that they are the real in-group, and that up on the hill, those squares who are so dumb that they waste all their days earning money by dull work to buy pseudo-riches such as Cadillacs and houses with mowed lawns and wall-to-wall carpeting, which they despise. They feel very, very much collective ego strength by being able to talk against the squares, because the out-group makes itself the in-group by putting the in-group in the position of an out-group. But both need the other one. This is the meaning of saying, love your enemies and pray for them that despitefully use you, because you need them. You don't know who you are without the contrast. So, love your competitors and pray for them that undercut your prices. You go together. You have a symbiotic relationship, even though it be formally described as a conflict of interests. Now, to see that kind of thing is the essence of this philosophy of nature. It goes together with the idea of the yang and the yin. That we don't know what the yang is, the positive, the bright side, unless we at the same time know what the yin is, which is the dark side. These things define each other mutually.